Good to see all of you, and let's get started. So for those of you who don't know, Think Company. Think Company is, we are an experienced design and technology consulting firm based in Philadelphia, although, you know, where are we all based these days? We're all really working from our homes from all around the world, all around the world. We help improve user experiences through technology and design and research. And we've been doing it for about 13 years. And we, a while ago, decided to start holding these webinars because we do a lot of public speaking for promotional purposes and to share some of our knowledge. And of course, when the quarantine hit, we had to change our strategy. So we offered some webinars over the summer. We took a little bit of a break, and now that October's hit, we're picking it all up again. And so before we get started with, hold on, I lost my mouse here. Well, anyway, before we get started with the webinar, I want to talk a little bit about some upcoming things with Think Company. First of all, in our current environment, we've all seen how important digital experiences are for business continuity. At Think Company, we help our clients create world-class digital experiences for their customers and employees. And if you're involved in helping your organization build or improve anything with that goal in mind, why don't we have a conversation? So if you can find our contact information at thinkcompany.com. You can follow this URL to schedule a Think session. Think sessions are typically, 1 to 3 hour sessions with some of our experts to just talk through the challenges that you have in front of you and see if there's anything that we can do to help. So we're happy to do that. For other events that are actually on our events calendar, on October 8th, we had this webinar with our interview with Ashley Turner. She's a huge advocate for ed tech. She's an academic technologist at Swarthmore College, where she trains faculty, staff, and students on learning technology software. But not only is Ashley passionate about ed tech, she's also on a mission to help diversify the tech industry. She's the organizer of a group called Philly Tech Sisters, which is an organization that helps women of color get more involved in the technology field by providing technical and professional development workshops. So our content strategy advocate, Dave Thomas, is going to just have a conversation for that hour with Ashley about some of the work that she's doing in advancing Black and Brown tech. And we'd love for any of you to attend. And there'll be a robust Q&A session at the end of that workshop. On October 15th, we have another webinar on service design for voting. If anyone hasn't noticed, we have an election coming up. Two of our thinkers, John Young and Dan Singer, both have been volunteering and working during elections and helping judges of elections in their work for quite a while. And so they've put together a webinar where they're really talking about how you can exercise principles of service design in improving the voting experience for everyone who's involved with that. So if you're interested in that topic, join us on October 15th from 3 to 4. Finally, on November 17th and 19th, Dave Thomas, again, our content strategy advocate, is going to hold a public version of our inclusive design workshop. So we offer this workshop. We provide this to our clients for a fee, but we do public versions of some of our workshops occasionally that people can sign up for. This workshop is intended to help organizations come up with systemic ways to mitigate bias in their design processes. The process begins with an acknowledgement that all users have biases, and so do we. And it asks how we might use design and content strategy tools and methods to reduce the harm those biases might cause, or to use some of our mental shortcuts to actually do good. So if you've seen any of Dave Thomas's talks on content strategy or on cognitive bias, this is really a workshop version of that, and it covers 2 days from 6 to 8:30 p.m. each of those days. So now we'll get into the workshop. The webinar we actually scheduled for today. A couple of ground rules about the webinar. You are all muted by default. That's the way the Zoom webinar platform works. We will start live Q&A at around 3:45. It can go to as long as 4:30 if you want to stick around. We're all ready to talk until 4:30 for that Q&A session. So please post any questions that you have within the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. So there's a chat feature and there's a Q&A feature. Make sure that you put your questions for the panel in the Q&A feature. I'll be monitoring Q&A. I'll choose questions during the Q&A session at the end based on how they've been upvoted. So if you use the upvote feature for questions that you like, that will help me select which questions we go to first. For those of you who've asked a question, if I select your question, I'm going to try to unmute you and introduce you so you can ask your question so we can make it more conversational. If you don't want to speak, or if you know your microphone doesn't work, or for whatever reason you just don't want your voice to be in there, just post the question anonymously, and then I'll ask the question in your place, and we'll get the panelists to ask through that. Just as a warning, we may not get to all the questions, and we also have moderators in chat and Q&A, so if you run into any tech support issues or have any other questions, just let me know through chat, and we'll try to get that taken care of. So without any further ado, I want to get to introducing our panelists for the UX in an enterprise agile world. First, we have Abby Duprimo. She's our Vice President of Design Operations. She's a versatile designer and a manager bridging research, user experience design, and visual design. Abby has led and executed projects with clients ranging from small startups to Fortune 50 enterprises since 2009. She's well-versed in Agile. She's going to introduce her background in Agile methodologies. And she brings a practiced intentionality to the systems and processes that our teams operate within. Chris Hungate is a senior design lead. During his tenure at Think Company, Chris has led some of the largest and most innovative projects, helping our clients to both develop new products and institute organizational change around effective product development principles. Chris knows how to quickly build momentum for an initiative within organizations while fostering productive collaborative relationships among all of the parties involved. Alina Udalevich is our Vice President of Project Management. She's the Vice President of the Project Management Office at Think Company. She focuses on setting the project management team up for success with the knowledge, processes, and tools they need to ensure all of our projects, no matter how complex, and make sure they're completed on time, within scope, and on budget. And then finally, Ryan, who's going to be acting as our host for the panel. He's a senior software developer at Think Company. Since joining Think Company, he's fostered the growth and use of pattern libraries across project teams, enlightened development teams with modern front-end development processes and best practices, and encouraged agile fundamentals at executive level, and built out robust, responsive, resilient user experiences. Ryan also rappelled off of a 30-story building with me last year, which was one of the most terrifying and fun experiences I've ever had. It's a lot of fun. And without any further ado now, I'm going to hand over the reins to Ryan.
Hello there. Thank you for that that intro. In fact, I've never been more agile than trying to get off that building with Phil. So first, we're going to go around and introduce ourselves. Although that was a wonderful introduction, we're going to just say hi and share a little bit about our experience with Enterprise Agile. So like Phil mentioned, I'm Ryan Khalid, senior developer here at Think Company. For the past 4 years, I've been embedded in a couple enterprise clients. We've been embedded on teams for the entirety of that time. I've spent some of that time as an architect across several of those product teams in the enterprise agile environment. And so that's the summary of my experience. I'm going to pass it over to Abby. Hi, Abby.
Hi. Sure. So I've been at Think for about 6 years, and in that time I've been working within Agile product teams, both from a consultant perspective and then also as an embedded consultant on large enterprise teams. So today I'm not as actively involved in actual project teams, but I'm working from a department level, making sure that our teams have everything they need so that the things that I've learned, I can help our teams embed into their own projects.
I'm Chris Hungate. I'm a senior design lead at the company, and I've been here for about 6 years as well. My role tends to be leading UX teams on Agile projects. Those tend to be larger enterprise engagements, and so I can help integrate UX into Agile development cycles, making sure that the UX team works well, make sure our UX designers can integrate well with other UX designers in our client companies, and a lot. So that's my background.
Hi everyone, I'm Alina. I've been at Think Company for 4 years now, starting as a project manager and now heading up the project management department. My Agile experience might sound familiar to some of you. It started with just reading the internet and doing my best and hacking away, trying to understand everything that is expected of me and expected of others. I have played the consultant role at Think Company on Agile projects and even before Think Company, so most of it has been from the consultant's lens. At this point, I'm now certified as a Scrum Master and a product owner, so I have some of the schooling under my belt as well, but my role is similar to Abby's, where I'm just supporting our teams to make sure that they have the tools that they need to be successful, both in an agile environment and not.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for that. So the first question that we're going to ask is for the audience. Before we jump into the conversational section, we want to know just a little bit about you and the role that you play on your teams. So we should see a poll popping up shortly with some questions for the audience there. I'm also going to answer it. Oh, I can't vote. Okay, so take a second and let us know. It is multiple choice, so feel free to select a few if a few apply. We'll wait to see that. This will help us tailor the conversation towards the folks that are sitting here listening with us. So thanks for being here. Hopefully it's not too hard of a pop quiz at this point. All right, we'll give it just a couple more seconds here. All right. Well, there's a very clear winner. You should see the result of the poll popping up there in front of you. Lots of folks here from UX UI design, which makes a lot of sense. You're trying to figure out how to get your foot into that agile process. Few engineers, some research, some product leadership. So a nice healthy mix, but a clear standout there. Very cool. All right, thank you for sharing with us. And one last housekeeping thing. We're going to say what Agile is before we get started, right? Just to make sure we're all on the same page. You know, we have a shared language around what Agile is. Now, of course, this is what Agile is. I'm sharing the wrong screen as always. Permanently sharing the wrong screen. There we go. This is Agile, obviously. Pretty clear cut. We shouldn't have to talk about it much more than that. No, of course not, right? Agile is essentially boils down to 4 principles. I won't belabor it. Lots of people here have read it a whole bunch, I'm sure. But those principles are individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. All decidedly not typical enterprise ways of doing things, right? And so, as you saw on that very large map, there's there's the safe agile method. There's all kinds of different methods that are built on top of those principles as frameworks to try and make things work. And we're going to talk a little bit today about how UX fits into a bunch of those different types of processes. All right, Ryan's ramble is over, and let's get to the part that you're here for. Let's get started. The first question is for everyone. I'm going to start this off by asking Abby, hey, what are some of the common challenges that you notice when we first start user experience work with a enterprise client in regards to Agile, of course? You know, we've signed up, we know we're going to work together, and then what? You know, we sit down day one.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think ultimately it always depends on the environment, but I think something that often people, especially clients that are newer to Agile, they have a fear of doing something that isn't Agile with a capital A. So I think it's important to know that it is just a framework. And ultimately what you're trying to do is increase collaboration and transparency and communication across the team. And the process is Agile just as the product is. So you need to figure out what works for the team instead of sticking to certain things that you think fit into the paradigm of Agile. And then it's often working with our stakeholders so that they understand that over time so that they can craft how they're working with us in a way that's going to benefit everyone.
To stop muting myself. That all makes perfect sense. And it will be, I think, probably a common theme among our panelists. Let's hear from Alina about some of the things you notice when we first, start out with a client on a UX journey?
I think some of the challenges start with the definition. We set the definition today, but that doesn't always happen. And we each, many people describe themselves or their working styles as agile-ish. And as soon as you bring the ish in, there are differences in processes, in expectations, in role definition, and challenges can quickly become overwhelming if we don't take the time to connect and start talking the same language. So I think that's kind of in the beginning, one of the first things that I've seen become a roadblock.
Yeah, making sure you get that shared language up front until things become mismatched further down the road. That makes a ton of sense. What about you, Chris?
Yeah, so my experience, sort of going into a lot of organizations, agile methodologies tend to start out like in the engineering department or engineering team. And so often those teams are doing a really good job of doing Scrum, sprint schedules, things like that, and they're developing the things that are being given to them to build. There are some challenges around like taking that model and integrating with the rest of the business, right? So your business folks having input into that process, design, marketing, sales, like all the integration tends to be the challenge. And so that's kind of one of the reasons we're here today, is to talk about how to, when you do have some successful agile practices running, how to kind of integrate the rest of not just UX and design, but business input, stakeholder input, user research, all those kinds of things that are sort of not traditionally agile. Like how do you work with those and collaborate in real time with that sort of train that's running on this agile schedule?
Yeah, as an engineer, I've been in that room, right, when suddenly design decisions start to change on the fly, and it feels like you're being agile, but sometimes you're sort of undoing some of the work that's been done in the design process. So I hear you. That's always a challenge, I think, when we're first introduced, is seeing those kind of well-formed agile habits sometimes leave UX behind. So definitely agree with you there. Well, without further ado, I mean, you've mentioned some ways we try and solve that, and I don't think there's a reason not to dive right into a couple of different ways we try and feed UX into the process. So, Chris, maybe you can elaborate a little bit about what that process might look like.
Yeah, so one of the things we have talked a lot about just at Think Company and with our clients is like understanding that sort of engineering track may already be going for you, right? Where you have a sprint schedule and they're building things. Oftentimes we try to immediately like just integrate UX directly into that cycle. And so UX designers sometimes find themselves trying to work as quickly as development, not really having any sort of formulated vision or guidance into what the design might be. So we try to like jump in and just do wireframes quick, or sometimes we'll have a design system we're working with. We try to like do it really quickly. And sometimes we find that the further we get on that track, trying to keep up with the speed of development, that things break from a design standpoint. So we start to design ourselves into corners. Some of our UX patterns start to break as we uncover, new user needs or new business goals, and we're like, I wouldn't have designed it that way if I knew this, right? So integrating directly with a development team and having a cross-disciplinary team at the agile level can work if it's a very small organization, or for those teams are given a lot of autonomy. What we find in large organizations is that agile track of development is often like 1, 2, 3 levels removed from the actual product or program level decision making. And so to kind of integrate with that, we sort of adapted some of the models in the industry, like dual track agile, tri-track agile, which allow for design and above that research and strategy to sort of run along parallel tracks with that sort of development release train, if you will, so that we can take the time to do proper discovery and proper research, and take the time to think about the product a little bit more holistically, working a little bit ahead, sort of laying runway, if you will, for that agile release train, so that we're a little bit more confident in what's being built. The business is a little more confident that they're getting the value they want. And then development can keep moving at the pace they need to move.
Yeah, and so you actually, I mean, there's a really nice graphic that I'm going to share because I think it'll help. It certainly helped me. It'll help the audience, understand a little bit of this tri-track that we're talking about, right? So those are you can see the three tracks that Chris was alluding to, and something worth noting here is that there's no specific roles, right, for any of these given tracks. Different parts of the team play different parts at each track, right? It's not silos where your devs don't hear about or understand research or design. And so I don't know, Abby, maybe if you could allude to like the types of parts that a design lead might play across these different tracks, in regards to both, the first and the second, but also, the actual development of things.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I found that design is most effective when we're being paired at the product owner level, so that we have insight and input into how the product is working, decisions that are going into it. And really each of these three levels here, design is either supporting or driving. And with that, research is as well. So you're really getting feedback consistently throughout the life cycle of the product development. And this could happen, not just at the understand level. You're doing some upfront, maybe in-depth research, in-depth interviews to understand what you need to create that backlog or the roadmap. You're doing design validation of wireframes to test some early ideas. Even once things are built, you're doing research and user testing on that. So design is involved at all those different stages to keep the product moving forward.
Yeah, and often the a designer in a lead role who's sort of overseeing a design team or trying to work across teams can be that sort of the tying thread between these tracks, right? So in fact, in the current project I'm on, I'm often participating in research and strategy and helping to guide those and keeping all the tracks in mind as we're doing that, right? And making sure that research and strategy is sort of executed on really well at the middle track level, and then doing my best to do a good job of helping to integrate development and design, bring developers into the fold earlier in the process, talking about feasibility and things like that with them, just to be sure that all these three tracks are not also their own silos, that they are connected threads that are serving the same end goal.
Yeah, absolutely. That's another recurring theme that I think we'll hear today, right? Is that there's a lot of effort that goes into connecting these threads, and worthwhile effort. I think maybe that's something that Alina can speak to. Across this process, working with design leads, tech leads, the product owner, individual contributors. Like, how does that work out? Trying to manage that across three essentially streams of work in tri-track.
Yeah, I mean, it's
what
not
are
easy.
Some of those challenges?
It's not easy. That's challenge number one. If you have this many things happening at once, staying on top of it all is definitely a challenge. I think that's where a great product owner would come in. The product owner is sitting between the user experience and the design team, the tech team, and business. So it's just being the connective tissue between all of the various items of work, and making sure that the person in that role of a product owner is doing their best to unblock each team, but also connect the dots. What team one is doing and how that impacts team two, and how the work of team one impacts team three. And you're sort of keeping either a roadmap or a plan or something at a high level so that you can understand the bird's eye view of all of the work when you have so many things going on underneath.
Yeah, and that's so incredibly valuable, because I've also seen it, when it's there and when it's not there. If you're working on, let's say, something like a design library as a team, you have UX designers, you've got UI developers, you have completely separate product teams trying to integrate these different patterns. And trying to make decisions is something we spend a lot of time working with PMs and product owners and trying to iron out a process of like, how do we make a change to this design system, right? Because it's usually a living, breathing thing. And this tri-track like helps facilitate that a lot, I think. And having someone in that PM role really goes a long way to facilitate those conversations. We talked a little bit about that feedback loop, right? On the diagram, there's that little part at the end where you have developers like me building, and then we release it. And then, that's something that's often forgotten. And I'd love to hear from Abby a little bit about how do you keep learning and growing from that process?
Yeah, I think it's very easy and often it happens, especially at the enterprise level, where you do all this upfront work, all this research, all this design work, and then you release it, and then it's out in the world, and then you're not necessarily tracking how it's going because you're so focused on the next thing that you have to get out. So, I mean, it's really critical that you are building in some sort of process to be tracking or getting feedback on the things that you're developing and releasing. I think it's always preferable to do this in small chunks so that you're releasing features at a small rate and not just waiting for a huge chunk of work or a gigantic release and then doing it all at once. Because then you can collect targeted feedback on that thing in the environment that it's living, which is the most valuable feedback that you can get. And then if you can't do that, I mean, there are ways that you can get valuable feedback still, whether that's through even having some staging environments and doing it in that way, or doing prototype designs and getting feedback that way. So there's ways that you can scale it, but it's critical that you're not just letting something out in the world and letting it live and not following up on it.
Ooh, we can't hear you, Ryan.
Said every engineer in the room cheered when you said small releases. So it's important that the moderator be the first one to talk while muted so that you can all feel better when it happens. Small releases are great. Of course, now I muted myself and I lost my train of thought about your great ideas.
I mean, I'll just add a little bit from.
Jump in.
I guess I'm here to sort of represent the product owner a little bit. And I think from my personal perspective, it's important that the product owner is involved in the research and understanding the user to help make decisions on their behalf. So letting your product owners in on the research, I think, is a really important thing. At the end of the day, the product owner, a lot of the times, is responsible for taking the priorities of the business, technology limitations and abilities, and the user. So without knowing the user, it's really tough to advocate for them in the appropriate way. So get your POs involved in your research.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen firsthand several times how powerful a PO sitting in on a research session, seeing a user struggle with something, just to sell the notion that we need to fix that thing, right? So as a designer, often we're trying to represent the voice of the user, and hearing it straight from the user, there's just no substitute. So.
Is my mic on? Amen. Preach. Sorry, I have this delayed screen at the moment. I as an engineer, I've been on many agile teams where at the very end of the sprint, you realize that you're supposed to be tracking something, and that someone wants to know if something's happening and it needs to be measured. And so having product owners and research aligned to say, like, we know that this is what needs to change and that's what we want to measure. And this is what we're trying to improve, both from a user experience and business goals, right? And managing those both. Knowing that up front makes it a lot easier to build out the analytics ahead of time. Even if you just need to programmatically know if you're achieving KPIs or however you're choosing to measure.
I think that's also important from a design perspective, because if there's a business case or business value to be tracking something, you need to know that early on, not only for development, but for design, because you may design something differently to be achieving a certain goal that that metric is trying to track. So it's important to have that conversation early.
Yeah, it feels like one of those things that's always last and should probably be first, right? That's one of those cart before the horse situations.
Well, yeah, and the more you're tracking, the less reliant you are on one source of, user feedback or product feedback, right? You get data to back up your qualitative research, and that can provide that extra support when you're starting to see things, if that's happening across the board, if those are isolated cases. So the sort of a combination of like qualitative user research, talking to users, and looking at the data and the application that you're tracking can help you make better product decisions, and that's across the board.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've talked a lot here about the research track, but I think we could spend some time talking about the next track down, right, which is the partly design and dev exploration. And Chris, maybe you could talk a little bit about like what that track looks like. You either at a product team level or across several product teams.
Yeah, I think like the middle track, as we affectionately call it, is sort of where the magic happens in this tri-track model, in my opinion. Of course, I'm a UX designer, so everyone's involved, little ego, right? But I think that's track 2 is where the integration is happening, where product owners and designers and stakeholders are all talking about the problems that you're trying to solve for the user that you've become aware of through that strategy and research track, right? So you're actually trying to solve the problems. You're doing the design work. You're in day-to-day, having UX elaboration sessions, hashing out the nitty-gritty details, working with developers to figure out what's feasible, talking to solution architects about how to integrate the data, get the data in that you need to show in the product. And so that's really where most of the product things are happening on a day-to-day basis from a formative standpoint. And so that tends to be where we focus a lot of our effort as a product team. Several designers working across several product owners in some cases, working on several features at once. And that's where we've found success with squad models where, POs can pair with designers and developers and solution architects to all sort of like streamline those communication channels and relationships to move several things forward at once. And then looking across those squads using things like discipline guilds and to make sure that we're not building silos through squads, that we still have ways to share across squads that, where everyone maintains awareness of what all the other squads are doing. Everyone's maintaining a holistic viewpoint of the product. And sometimes across several products where you have sort of program level meetings across design disciplines or development disciplines where you're sort of sharing best practices and tools. So I think like that is the track that we tend to focus a lot on as far as helping to integrate UX with Agile development.
Yeah, you would think I would disagree with you because all the development happens on that third track, but that's where all the fun is. That's the churn and the prototyping and the trying things out. The like real meat of the collaboration seems to happen on that track. You mentioned squads and guilds, and that's probably something that some of our audience is familiar with, but some might not be. Can you go into a little bit about what those are?
Yeah, those are really just sort of organizing models, right? So let's say you have a team of designers and you have some POs, and POs are focused on features. Instead of just always treating like all of the work as one pool of work and you're sort of divvying it among designers, it can help to have cross-disciplinary squads where you have POs and designers and developers, BAs in some cases, sort of working together as a team to move certain features or certain product aspects forward. Again, so you start to build those teams, if you will, those mini teams within the bigger team that can help build efficiencies in communication and scheduling, especially. Like obviously everyone's calendars are very very busy and packed. And so like imagine trying to schedule a meeting with 6 designers versus 1 designer, right? So it can help streamline things moving in the squads, but that also has a danger of creating silos, and we're trying not to create more silos when there already are silos. So some of the things we do to remedy the fact that squads can be siloing is making sure that we're not just sending a designer off to a squad and they're working on their own stuff and there's no like collaboration with other designers or developers or BAs. So having like a design guild or a front-end developer guild to come together on a weekly, bi-weekly basis to share the work that you're doing. So it could be group crit style, share some of the practices you're doing, look at the design system across all the things, make sure you're not introducing patterns that are different from another squad's patterns and things like that. So trying to build that consensus across the product while still reaping the benefits of a squad model, basically.
All right, there's a lot to unpack. I don't know if Abby or Lena has any thoughts about, the success and viability of squads, or if you love them, you hate them.
I think they need to work together really well to be effective, because I think there's a big risk in the fragmentation of squads. So you really need to have an effective guild model where you are carving out that time so that you can collaborate and understand what else is going on, or you're going to end up going on separate tracks and get very fragmented quickly.
Absolutely. So we talked a lot about the top track and the middle track as far as like design goes, and we seem to think like all of the development happens on that last track. What is the role? I know my opinion here, and I'll share it in a little bit. But like, what's the role that design plays on that third, actual production track, in your mind? And I'll put this to Abby first.
On the third track, design. I mean, design is always going to be involved for support on that track. I think you need to have designers who are working with your developers to let them understand what the intention of the design, to work through some of the workflows, understand how it's supposed to work, be there for questions, be there for QA. So I think there's always that aspect to that in the moment in the sprint support.
Yeah, and to build on that, like the way I look at tracks 2 and 3 is almost like the 80-20 rule for designers and 20-80 rule for developers, where designers are spending 80% of their time in track 2 doing that sort of look ahead design work. And they're spending 20% of their time working with developers to kind of, as they're building the thing that was designed, fleshing out additional states, additional, things that just weren't captured in the initial design that developers, have uncovered, additional requirements that surface while the thing's being built, technical limitations that require design to be, reworked. In often cases, some things are just better served with a conversation between a designer and a developer than to spend the time doing a prototype. So it's really just making sure that designers have the time to work with developers while they're building, and that we're not just handing it off to them expecting them to make the magic happen, right? So that's where that sort of 20%. The opposite is true, I think, for developers, where 80% of your time is spent building the things, but also we want 20% of your time on track 2 so that you're fully aware of what's coming. You can have input into the design process and what's being built and how it's being designed. So that we're also not designing in a vacuum. We're not designing things that can't be built or that could be built, but there's a way to build them with a lot less effort without sacrificing, usability, things like that. So that collaboration is key on those 2 tracks, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we'll be in the middle of a sprint and we'll find some kind of business case or technical limitation and then have to pivot pretty fast. And that's when we have to sneak in and steal some designer time. We again have talked a lot about managing time and collaboration. And Alina, I'm curious to hear, like, what are some of those challenges when it comes to the actual scheduling of people's time, and time is money and budget, and those are all real world things that people have to face. How do you juggle, do you squirrel away some time for at the end when I need to steal a design person's time?
I mean, there's a project manager from a consulting perspective always has a secret budget if they're a good project manager. No one knows about it. The story we tell, it might be different, but there is always a secret budget. But from a,
And that's just good planning. That's all.
it is good planning. If you don't have it, it hurts. It will hurt you at some point. But the 80-20 rule is really important. If you are responsible for filling up a sprint and understanding capacity, like not filling somebody up to full capacity and leaving the time for a designer to pop in for 20% of their availability and vice versa is really, really important. And for sure, and on all projects, you need design support as development progresses and development input during the design phase. And I've seen many instances where that didn't happen and the pain that causes down the line. I think the other part about planning is to be realistic. You're actually working with humans and not robots or machines. So like when you're thinking about capacity, can someone really be working and coding for 40 hours a week? Or is it more realistic that they're coding for a little bit less than that? Maybe they're actually at their computer for 36 hours a week. And a certain percent of that are the Scrum ceremonies. So it's like, it's important to keep in mind that 40 hours, like filling up someone for 40 hours of development is probably going to leave you with an incomplete sprint almost every single time.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think like capacity planning and also estimation, like that's one thing that often goes overlooked. And in like a second or first track, like there's really good estimation practices usually in Agile because you're doing it every sprint. But from a design standpoint, and Abby, this is something that I actually learned from you a few years ago, is that like design estimation, t-shirt sizing up front is super crucial because then you have something to plan against and you have something to track against. And that capacity planning, if you're tracking a designer at 32, 36 hours a week, and you know how much effort a thing is and how many weeks it might take, you can actually plan that capacity and set appropriate expectations for when the design might be complete. And certainly there's, estimation is estimation for a reason. It's not like the actual thing that's going to happen. So just accounting for the variability in how long design takes to actually do versus how long it might take to get through approval processes, which that's something to consider in like large organizations is review and approval processes often take multiple cycles because it's not just your PO reviewing it. Often there's a group product owner or program level folks or stakeholders, or in some cases there's a whole organization of people that are overseeing and handing down prioritized work on a quarterly basis to a Agile, team or product team to do, and they want to see the stuff before it, goes out the door. So that's one of the sort of Agile-ish things about large organizations. It's very, very difficult to avoid those long review cycles.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we're getting close to time. I don't know if we want to pivot over to some of the Q&A stuff or take a look there.
Hey,
Hi, Phil.
I can come in and help manage. First of all, Q&A blew up. I don't think we've ever had a webinar where we had 11 questions in Q&A before Q&A started. Usually a lot of stuff feeds in there. So I think I'm just gonna dive right into it because usually I start with my questions, but that wouldn't be fair to the folks that signed up to get in here. So the first person we have to ask question is Amelia. Amelia, I'm gonna unmute your mic and you can ask it if you want. If you stay silent, then I'll try it out myself. You're live with us now.
Okay. I asked a few anonymously, but I think I submitted one. Okay, so the importance I think is pretty clear probably for all of us in the research stages and making sure that we are figuring out requirements and have clarity around what it is that we want to build. So I was wondering how much time you might generally allocate to that portion of the project.
So you're talking about like research and requirements gathering, which can be two different things, I think. So like the research, I think tracks 1 and 2, one especially, we think of it almost like a quarterly, at the enterprise level, like quarterly research and and discovery tends to be about right. So, you might have a research activity around a particular feature or set of features that takes most of the quarter to execute the research, do the roll up, do all the socialization and sort of road showing of that research before it ever becomes like an approved thing to send down to the next level, right? So I think giving it the time, because again, in large organizations, depending on whether it's customer research or internal, like associate research, if it's an internal application, getting internal folks time is very difficult, and obviously like recruiting customers, especially for some industries, can be very difficult. So just setting the expectation that research takes time and doing it right takes time, and synthesizing a lot of research takes time. And then, like I said, socializing that research at the end of it, like there's usually a lot of people that want to see it and sign off on it. And often that research can be used, vision decks, things like that, that are used to secure funding for that actual work. So just the life cycle of that research effort, and can be like a quarter to do the research and even another quarter by the time it gets budget to actually turn into product features. So, and then once it comes down to the second track, there's still just often more discovery, more requirements gathering to be done, because again, it's sort of done at like a vision or research strategy level. And so then it has to be turned into a real thing, which takes additional requirements gathering, technical requirements, business requirements, additional user research to hone in on the finer points of that thing. And that most of that can be done within a quarter, sort of the research and design for that thing can be done within a quarter. But it's, again, one of the things designers are often surprised about when they come onto a large enterprise Agile project is how long it takes to get things done, especially if you're used to like agency style work where like you're in projects and it moves really quickly and you're like churning out designs really quick. That pace can still happen at the design level, but because of the size and scope of the organization around it, it often takes a lot longer than you might be used to.
Sure. And while working, say, in a different scenario with a smaller team on an internal initiative, do you have any tips for introducing that change and showing the value to giving that track of the project the nurture and time that it does require?
You can, I would say, like, just try small experiments. So if there is something small that you could test with maybe doing hallway testing, and you can show the value in the process, that can generate buy-in to then have the conversation on how you can increase the size and scope of that effort.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks, Amelia. I'm going to mute you, but if we might get back to your some of your other questions that you posted anonymously. I'm going to dive over to Brian McElhaney, also known as Mac, who just can't get away from us. Mac, your audio should be working now.
Yep. Hey, all. I am curious, when working on an Agile team.
Well, uh-oh.
Oh.
I did that. Hold on. Mac, I muted you by mistake. I was trying to unmute. Well, I'm not going to explain this. You're coming back.
I'm back.
Okay, you're back.
I'm
Sorry
back.
about that.
Hey, all. So I'm curious, when working with an Agile team here, recently, we get asked to measure the impact of our sprints through things like OKRs and KPIs. And I'm curious if any of the projects that you all faced, whether or not you've seen any opportunities to leverage maybe design research or other qual research activities to inform, how well a project did, I guess, either, assessing the work of something for an upcoming second iteration, or like, those kinds of things. Like, have you found any ways like use design thinking to measure the impact, I guess, of the quality of something that's been done?
So I know that on a lot of the projects that I've worked on where we're working on tools for internal associates, they basically have the equivalent of like a CSAT score for internal associates for the products they use, and so they get a little bit more extensive than your typical like marketing CSAT, but they have a survey that goes out every quarter that sort of measures the value, how satisfied the agents or the internal associates are with that application. So that's how I've seen it measured before at a product level. I don't think I've seen it measured specifically at a UX level, but more like just value for the product features of people.
I know we have done work where it has been more analytics based, metrics based, where we redesigned a platform and then worked with our dev teams to build in metrics that we provide a measurement report. I think it's every quarter. So, I mean, that was more of a long-term approach, but it's become standardized now so that we can see how the improvements are being received by the users.
I'm going to dive in here a little bit, and we have another client that we work with, and we do quarterly analytics reporting for both qualitative and quantitative data with them. And those quarterly reports do include like more qualitative stuff, like assessing large groups of feedback to try to identify what what trends they're seeing in the feedback, as well as A/B testing and things like that. And then I think that the quantitative functionality or the quantitative metrics they're tracking are things like Net Promoter Score for the platform. So I think they're looking at how the quantitative metrics are adjusting, adapting up and down, and then sort of assessing the qualitative feedback that comes in through whatever feedback tools they're using to really know what they should focus the team on next. So if Net Promoter Score suddenly goes down and there's a whole bunch of feedback coming in about a specific feature, and they know that you have to focus on that feature. All right. Hope that was good, Mac.
Yep. Thank you.
Great. I'm going to dive into. What I'm going to do is I'm going to keep with some of the folks who've posted questions and have their names. So we have Christy Duncan. Let me find you on the list, Christy. And I'm going to open your mic. And if you want to ask your question, your mic's open.
Great, thanks a lot. Yeah, I was interested in any approaches that you have taken that have been successful in helping product managers, designers, and developers both get and maintain that holistic view of the product. And the context here is what happens when that product is actually a very large multi-capability platform. So we have product owners by, say, it's individual product or feature areas, and they really need to understand, as do the designers and engineers, how that fits into the bigger picture. Because from the customer or the user point of view, it's simply one product.
In like traditional Agile teachings, there's something called Scrum of Scrums, which is an interesting concept where you are those leaders of each feature or each division, however you might describe it, are gathering every so often to talk about at a high level what they are doing so that they can try to connect the dots between each other. So that is one approach.
I think also you can create like a visioning design essentially. And this is, I think, something that isn't big A Agile, right? Because it's like you're designing ahead, but it gives you a guidepost and for all the teams to see like, what could this whole product look like? And then once you have that vision, you can work within the different pieces and the different products within the larger product.
Yeah, I could say as an engineer, having that larger vision or North Star or whatever you might call it, that look ahead is even in an agile fashion really useful, right? Because you're building quickly, you're iterating quickly, but you're also making decisions that might limit you in the future, right? So if you're always making trade-offs, which you are when you write code, you have to make sure that those trade-offs aren't going to make things that are expected in the future harder. And so knowing what everyone's expecting in the future, really is valuable all the way down to like the daily engineering level.
And another way I've seen that facilitated is, this is actually something I learned from the Scaled Agile framework, where basically you have quarterly planning meetings where effectively everyone in the product organization comes together either virtually or in the same room, ideally in the same room. And it's really a time you sort of start out this planning session with the business coming and sort of explaining to everyone who works on the product what the vision is, what the plan for the next quarter is, the next year, right? So that everyone sort of gets a sense of how what they're working on connects to the business value. And so I've seen that be pretty successful, just because everyone's involved and everyone gets a chance to like meet everyone else who's working on the same thing that you are, even if they're in a distant team across the world, right? So I've seen that be a pretty successful way to be very inclusive of everyone across the board.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah, and I'll dive in with one other example, even though I'm not a panelist. And I don't work in design at Think Company anymore, but the last project that I worked on, actually, Alina worked on it as well, and we were developing a feature set that would be injected into multiple product lines for our client. And one of the things that they would that they did was they had sort of a centralized team who was responsible for the feature set that would also attend all the sprint reviews on each of the different product lines when those products were trying to integrate that feature set into their product. So I don't know if that's really esoteric and it's hard to visualize what I'm talking about.
No, actually, I've got a pretty clear picture of that. So that was great.
Yeah, so it was sort of this like centralized, decentralized model where they called it a product that we were working on, but we had representation out on all the other teams. And so it worked out pretty well then. And then we did what Chris was talking about as well. There were these quarterly, like massive meetings where every product owner and every business line would all get together and we talk about the future of those products as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. Let me go to, I'll ask one of the anonymous, we've got JT's been waiting. I gotta let JT talk. Let me find your widget over here, JT. JT, it's great to have you. You can unmute and ask your question if you want.
Oh, hello. Hey, friends.
Hey.
I asked two. I think I'll ask the one that I'm kind of most interested in. Have you guys have any experience, maybe you could talk about your experience in trying to help Scrum teams who are so used to working sprint to sprint and working on kind of just what they're focused on? Like how might you help them kind of be okay with slowing down and starting to feel more comfortable focusing on the outcomes of what they're building rather than being so focused on their velocity or shipping code and just their output?
I mean, for me, that's kind of touches on buy-in from leadership, because those Scrum teams are probably needing to perform a certain way based on something that could potentially be outside of their control. So for all of this to work, buy-in is really important across the board. So I would almost start with whoever is dictating down to the Scrum team before them specifically, and trying to gain buy-in for a new model and talking about your own perspective and more about the output and not just throwing features out there.
Mm-hmm. Teams measure what they think or have been told is important, right? And Alina's dead on. As an engineer who's been on teams who some don't care about the metrics in a very agile way, right? Like they read them, they're a result of what happened, and then you learn from it. And other teams who are very concerned with those metrics. It's almost always a company cultural, something higher up you have to speak with that will have the ability to nudge that one way or the other, and maybe also help highlight why culturally that might be true for one team or multiple teams in any given organization.
Yeah, I've definitely seen where, velocity can be a very toxic measure, especially when I've seen where, teams have been pitted against each other and it's been communicated on a biweekly basis of this team is faster than that team, and that is not productive for a lot of reasons. So I agree with everything that's been said, as it definitely starts at the leader level.
I think connecting some of the things that we said earlier, setting a vision for the work, is velocity really meeting the vision, or is it something else that would meet the vision? And then in addition to these like incremental tests, like what if we try something that's only slightly different and start kind of like nudging, decision makers into the direction that you're looking for versus maybe attempting to do a larger overhaul right away.
Right.
Yeah, I think speed or velocity is sort of an outcome of doing things the right way. And so like focusing on good collaboration, good team building, good relationship building, giving people the right tools, doing good capacity planning, all those things contribute to a high functioning team. And that high functioning team over time is going to start to move faster just naturally. And so if you look at speed as maybe a goal, a long-term outcome, if you will, versus like the thing you're shooting for, shoot for value and then speed will come basically.
Mhm.
Yeah, actually, I love that point, right, of making it about achieving speed through better processes and more collaboration rather than achieving speed by like pulling features out of the sprint to make sure that you can hit your metrics. Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks for the question, JT. Great talking to you.
You too.
Okay, I'm going to hit the next two questions that I actually think they're kind of related, but they're both asked by anonymous, so I'll ask them for them. The first one is, does anyone have any strategies for juggling R&D with active maintenance releases while working with a small team with limited resources? I think this is huge, huge question. Or like, organizations always want to do the big innovative things and think big and all that kind of stuff, but your sprint teams are often saddled with just getting shit done. So anybody have any thoughts about that?
Prioritize. It's humans. There's only so many hours in the day. What's the priority? And I get it. Everything's the priority, but what is actually the priority? I think discussing priority is the first step there. And then how to plan your sprints.
And
Yeah,
setting
often.
expectations.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So go ahead. I was gonna say setting expectations is really important too. So like once you have that priority, I mean, what is realistic to achieve? And I think what Chris was saying before about the 80-20, I think a similar approach to that is important so that you're, thumbing in, is it 10% of my time is going to go to this and 20% is going to this and the rest is going to this track. So just being cognizant of what you're doing and intentional with your time is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, part of the original Agile framework is to empower the team to say, like, what is the single most important thing, right? If like we can only get one thing done, it's at the top of the board. And having that clarity and that level of insight into like what needs to get done, sometimes requires prodding for a product owner, or requires hurting the developers who are a little scattered on things. It's being able to point at the board and say like, this is the most important thing to us at any given time. Goes a long way.
As long as you don't say you want to do refactoring, it's fine.
But I do.
Well, actually, I mean, that's actually a good, sometimes like selling the need for good research, good, discovery is that we don't want to incur the cost of building the wrong thing, right? So if you build something based on a spec without having to talk to users first, right? And then you end up building something, like the cost of a quarter's worth of development time to build something that users didn't even want to begin with or need to begin with, like you can start to add those costs up and say, hey, like, see these things that we built in the past that we ended up having to rebuild or re-architect or something, that's the cost of not doing this thing. So it's really kind of selling that.
Yeah.
I've also seen in, and again, the person who posted this question was saying with limited team size and limited resources, but I've seen, I remember a client that had a massive back-end replatforming project that they had going on, and every sprint team was focused on just that platform project. And meanwhile, they had taken their backlog and it was kind of like living over on the side of everything else they were working on. And the team had free reign over the backlog to go in and tackle anything that they found interesting for post replatforming. And they could work on that if they found downtime for themselves, and they kind of turned that into their own little R&D project. Folks would grab onto their own little idea. The person that was describing this to me said it was kind of like, in a detective squad, every detective has a couple of cold cases that they're chasing. And so it allowed people to sort of do that, get out of the mindset of like, I'm just doing this rote replatforming stuff, which isn't that creative or thoughtful or, R&D oriented. And it gave folks something they can dive over to work on. But again, that's not very agile, or maybe it is kind of agile, but it's not like it wasn't a formalized process. But once they finished the replatforming work, they had a good backlog of things that were had been baked a little bit.
I've seen that done using spikes before. So putting a
Mhm.
spike into a sprint, allowing the time for the work, and the spike is really just kind of an investigative effort. And that could help like the answer that the spike brings could help prioritize the efforts and make decisions for the future. A little more time for R&D, a little less time, and you can flex based on the findings.
Yeah.
And I've also seen setting aside one sprint a quarter for not building things, just doing R&D, taking care of tech debt, design debt. And that's just something that obviously leadership has to buy in on.
Yeah.
But just
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, I think that's where the concept of the hardening sprint comes in too, where it's like that's kind of where you start taking care of a lot of that stuff, and then you don't build up all that tech debt over time that causes these things like, a multi-quarter replatforming project.
Right. And then you don't have product owners worried about you saying you want to refactor, right? There's time for it.
Yeah.
I would say that's a mature perspective though. And more times than not, in my personal experience, that has been a little bit of an uphill battle. I mean, I think we would be lucky if we have a situation where leadership or the decision-making team is advanced enough, or their like understanding of product development is advanced enough that they understand the need for an entire sprint for cleanup or whatever it may be.
That's great. We've crested over 4 o'clock, but we still have 35 participants. I think we can keep going. Related to this question, and then I'll try to find someone who may want to talk. While still allowing flexibility for the creative process, how can we encourage and enable UX designers to estimate and efficiently plan their work into sprints? So designers are not always familiar or used to estimating and planning their own work. So do you have any tips and tricks for helping them do that?
I mean, I recommend t-shirt sizing. And the best way to do that is you find your middle ground. So you find something that you've done or that you really fully understand how long it'll take or the effort that's going to go into it. And that becomes, say, your medium size. And then everything is relative to that. And so that can give you a sense of the estimation. And as far as combating creativity and how that fits in, I mean, if you're focusing on the outcome over the item, that then gives you more space to explore what those things could be that hit that outcome as you're planning.
Yeah, I think one great way to help designers focus on the more creative aspects of things, I think pretty commonly known as design systems, right? So same 80-20 rule, like design systems can take care of 80% of the mundane, normal UI things that every designer shouldn't necessarily have to design for themselves, radio buttons, common components, so that they have the time to focus on the more creative aspects of the problem solving of that product. So just having a design system to kind of speed you along so you're not spending that much time designing the things that every product needs.
I love that, Chris, because it sort of highlights this, notion that design systems aren't there to, stifle creativity. They're actually there to give you more space to be creative and to think about the harder problems that nobody's solved yet. That's great. All right, let's hear from another old friend. I'm going to go find Bill Holland here and give him the microphone, if it will work. All right, Bill, if you unmute, then what's your question?
Hey, y'all. Good seeing y'all. So mine is somewhat specific, trying to think through even in an environment that isn't safe or doesn't practice safe. Can we use program increment planning or similar exercises to help with that tri-track approach that you talked about earlier? And, kind of a follow-up, are there specific facilitation techniques or methods that you've used to kind of draw out what UXers need from a PIP?
It's a great question. So just knowing what's coming and the transparency of what's coming down the road can be just a good thing to check in on every quarter. Whoever has that list of things that they think UX is going to work on that quarter, just being visible can be a big deal, because then you can start thinking around like what's the right approach to those specific things that you're going to be working on. So even if you can't get a whole organization bought into doing quarterly planning, just even as a design team, taking time to look every quarter at your own processes, tools, what's coming down the road from a feature standpoint that you know of. Theoretically, that means there is some sort of roadmap that you can look at. When there's not a roadmap, often I find I spend a decent amount of time going around asking people like to figure out what the roadmap could be, right? And then I'm creating my own roadmap for my design team. So basically, just finding as many answers as you can, just cutting down the ambiguity where you can, and just providing some guidance to the team so they know kind of just what to expect for the quarter. And that's just, also gives you an opportunity to do retrospectives as a design team. Obviously, as much as you can extend that to the other tracks, the rest of the organization, the better. But that obviously takes a lot of coordination and influence where you may or may not have it. So start with your own team and see where that takes you.
Cool. Excellent. Thank you.
Just planning. Sorry, I love planning so much, and now I have to comment on it. The thing that I've seen personally is, when we join a team and they're not great at planning, and we're like, I guess they don't plan, so we're not going to plan. But just because others around you aren't doing it doesn't mean that you can't for your own team, just how Chris said. And you'll start to see that people will pick up on your good behaviors, because who doesn't want to know what's happening in 2 weeks and a month from now, especially in this environment where there are so many dependencies. So just because it's not happening doesn't mean you can't do it. And you don't need the title or the authority or anything like that to do it. So if you find a gap, I say fill it.
I think that's also like going back in the beginning, I mentioned that I think we're most effective when we're paired with the product owner or the business layer. And I think even if you're not positioned that way initially, by going through a process like that Chris and Lena were talking about, that over time is going to develop that trust relationship with people so that they see what you're doing, and that's going to put you in that role over time.
Cool. Wonderful. Thank you all.
Thanks, Bill. It's always great to talk. Let me go to another anonymous question here. When a stakeholder wants a timeline for several projects, some early in the research stage, some in maintenance, with requirements and priorities shifting daily, do you have any tips for maintaining a high-level timeline and clearly flagging change in scope, designs, or impact? There's a lot packed in there, but I see Elena unmuting, and I think she's the perfect person to answer this one.
There's a lot there. From a high level, I think it starts with communicating that we will always learn more information as time goes on. So making a plan today does not mean this is your plan for the rest of time and that you're done. Planning happens constantly, and changing priority and adjusting the plan is absolutely normal. So if you find yourself like even from day to day making small little updates, that is normal. Lean into it. I think that you're doing a good job if you're doing that. Keep your plan up to date. In terms of tracking change, a lot of project management tools like Team Gantt and Smartsheet, they have what's called baselines. So you can take a snapshot of where you are today so that when you make a change tomorrow, you can turn on where you were yesterday and you can see how the changes are occurring over time. So you can create a baseline every single day if that's effective for you, once a week, every 2 weeks, whatever it may be, so that you can track that. But I think communication is the first thing. Change is okay, and it's totally normal in the process, as long as people who are influencing that change understand the impact at the end of the day, that you might not get something else if you want this today.
Those are great answers. And kudos for being able to talk through the ice cream truck that clearly parked outside of
Listen, I gotta go. I'm ready for a Choco Taco.
I know, we're gonna put orders in a minute. Okay, let's see. How about interacting with product owners? So we have a question here. Do you have any tips on getting your product owner to be more interested and enthusiastic about research? Oh, what a big question. We usually have to have long back and forth and often aren't given the go-ahead or support we need to perform research. So this goes back to that old question. How do you make the case for research, especially in an agile environment?
I mean, I think there's different approaches to it. I think the base of it and the core of it is you need to show them the business value of it. There needs to be a good reason why they're investing this time in it. And I mean, you can always rely on like, there's gonna be less rework. There's gonna be less like refactoring, you know, like if you can understand up front and early what your users are likely going to want, that's gonna reduce the fact of the possibility of you putting something out in the world that is completely off base. So the more in line that you can be with people on the progression of the development of it, the closer you're gonna be.
Yeah, I think if you have a front-end developer embedded on the team, you know, so they spend a lot of time daily, probably sometimes with the product owner, they can be your best cheerleader. You know, they're able to help say things like, hey, you know, hey, that's pre-analytics, right? Like if you have a product owner who loves analytics, research is just analytics before you build it, right? Like, you know, it's one way of reframing it. Of course, it is not, and anyone who does research knows that's not the case. But framing it that way will help maybe, you know, frame it just in a way that's a little more palatable to do work before you do work. But yeah, get your front end developers to be your cheerleaders, because we love your research just as much as you do.
Yeah, I just want to build on that before Chris dives in and say, like, you know, your front end developers are your best advocates. And the other thing, if they're not, one of the things you can do to get your front end developers like on board with research is invite them to attend research sessions. So if you're doing a usability study, if you're doing any kind of discovery work, it will give them a lot of insight into the work that they do. And they crave seeing the people use the things that they build. So they're not going to be resistant to it. They're actually going to be excited by it. They're going to be you know, grateful that you invited them into it, and they're going to become your best advocates, like Ryan said. Sorry, Chris, I didn't mean to talk over you.
No, you're good. Yeah, I think the point of sort of reframing it, I think, is an important one. Sometimes, especially in large organizations, sometimes research can become a dirty word because people think it slows the process down. So oftentimes it depends like what you call research or what kind of research you're doing and when you're doing research. Often product owners they want to get started. They don't want to do upfront research, right? And sometimes that's okay as long as you at some point get to sort of validate the work you're doing with a user or you know, someone representing the user. So often in case if you're working on internal products or even products for customers, you can find people in your organization to test things with that at least provide a first stage of research to kind of validate the design that you're doing, and then seeing the value of that. And imagine if this was actually a customer providing that research, right? So finding ways to like baby step your research process. You just do whatever you can and not always have to rely on research up front or user research up front. Find the research that exists, find people who know about the customers or users to see just how much information you can get, and maybe just don't call it research.
Yeah.
Discovery or
just don't call it research. That's great. All right, I'm gonna hit, I know JT had to drop off because I think he dropped off a little bit after 4, but I'm gonna read his second question. He was asking, when Think Company designers join an agile product team, do we embed inside a single Scrum team with engineers and a PO, or do we support multiple Scrum teams at once? I have a suspicion the answer to this question is yes, all of the above. But I don't know if anyone has any thoughts about, you know, what of those two models, what do they think is the ideal, or what would make you choose one model over the other?
I think it's hard to say. I think it depends on the product and the client and the situation. I think there's pros and cons to both. There's certainly a focus that being on a single Scrum team provides. But if you're providing multiple, then you have a lot more information and context that can provide you with, more information when you're designing. So I think there's pros and cons.
Yeah, I feel like, as from the front end dev perspective, right? Like it's nice to have someone working at a higher level, like a front end architect who's concerned about things across teams. They're probably more focused on a design system or a pattern library, and they're able to execute at those, how can we solve needs across multiple channels? Whereas you focus on the nitty gritty as an individual contributor on a specific product. I have to assume it's somewhat similar in design. Is that wrong, Abby, Chris?
That's about right. Yeah, yeah. I think I've definitely worked on both. Like it's focused one team and also worked across several teams. Had designers on several squads, several product owners. Both work fine. I think in both cases, just being aware of what's going on outside of your focus is important. Just to become aware of what other design teams might be doing, even if they're not under your purview. Like if you're going into a client organization and you are like the Scrum team, like your designers and developers, just find a way to build relationships outside of that. Like ask questions, who else might be working on something similar, or are there any other design systems in this organization that we should leverage out of the gate instead of building our own from scratch. Just finding ways to break out of silos that sometimes we get put into is usually a pretty good approach.
Awesome. So we're down to 2 questions. We got 7 minutes. Let's see if we can get through both of them. I'm going to ask I think the bigger, scarier question first, which is there a flavor of Agile you feel works best with a well-built design practice? I say it's a scarier one because like, who follows, even if you pick a flavor of Agile, are you actually following it? So I don't know if anyone has any thoughts or feelings about the different Agile recipes that they've encountered, but this is sort of an open skate for that.
I think it depends on the track. I mean, tri-track Agile is there for a reason, right? So like thinking about the different tracks, different methodologies might work different for each track. So I think Scrum is probably the most commonly found at track 3, the development build level, right? Track 2, we found that Kanban, something is simple and easy to manage at the track 2 level. That's just sort of you're doing t-shirt size estimation, planning those on some sort of timeline, and like going through those in a Kanban fashion. And then at the top level, I think it's probably a little bit more traditional project management, where you have larger research projects or strategy projects that have probably a fixed timeline and a beginning and an end. So I think a mix of methodologies, I think, is actually probably more accurate.
Yeah,
that's great.
And I mean, I think I said earlier that ultimately, like, there are frameworks and their structures, but like you have to figure out what works for you as a team, and it's fine to make adjustments along the way, because it's more important that you're working all together.
That's probably why we end up with every client that we work with saying that they're Agile-ish, right? Because they customize the method to work with the culture of their organization or the needs of the organization.
Right.
Really makes them more agile than most, right? I mean, that's as agile as you can get if you make the system work.
Yeah, just make it work. That's great. Here's a good question. How involved is the project manager in research?
Well, as involved as your contract can afford, and as involved as your bandwidth can afford. So that's probably the easiest measure. The ice cream truck is still here, so
okay,
just to note that. But
we'll be right there.
Yeah, in terms of involvement, I think that the more a project manager understands about what the rest of the team is doing and how decisions are made, the better. So it's just about sort of prioritizing your own time, being involved if you can be, if you somehow have the budget for it and the time in your own bookings. I say do it, join, take notes if you can, offer to be around and help out. But to understand the process by physically being there is only going to make you more valuable. Well, or better at your job. I don't know, more valuable. Just better.
I mean, the best experience I've had with research was where we had a PM that was dedicated to our small research team, where they were basically managing all the research going on, which obviously like not everyone has that luxury. But I do find that, research takes a lot of time, and anytime a project manager can help facilitate all the projects that might be going, not only like facilitating the research, but facilitating and capturing the needs for research from the design team, because that's sort of where research needs are uncovered as you're working on the design. Oh, I wish we knew more about this. Well, let's go talk to users, or let's go talk to stakeholders, or whatever. So PMs can help sort of manage the sort of collection and execution of the research as well.
It's a great point. I like that idea too of really helping people understand the project manager is sort of the one managing the research backlog as well with all the other teams. We have one other question. I don't know if we're going to be able to get to this question. First of all, for anyone who's still on, we have a couple of points in chat that we listed. And if I can get through these before we get to the question. Again, if you want to request a complimentary think session, there's a link for that up in chat. If you have any feedback, we're going to be sending out an email that's both going to be having some of the links and information that we've been sharing here in the email to anyone who attended the session. So you'll be able to get that. There'll be a link to the 2-minute survey if you want to take it now, or if you want to wait for that email to come through. And if you do want to sign up for a virtual coffee with anyone who's on the panel, then there's another link for that if you want to do that. And don't forget to sign up for our future webinars. Again, getting past what we do now, conversation in Black and Brown tech. We have service design for voting. And there's another workshop with Dave Thomas on inclusive design that's coming up. So I guess we'll see if we can do this in 2 minutes, but the last question is, how does iterating on a product look in an enterprise software? We have users that might be flustered and slowed down initially by changes in their workflow. And Chris, I know you've worked on a lot of enterprise software projects, so maybe you have thoughts about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the pace of change is generally slow in enterprises anyway, but the one thing that we often don't think a lot about when we're designing products is the amount of training or retraining required. So sometimes just taking that into account, like how much and can we actually change this without disrupting current workflows, especially like support agents that are sort of measured on certain efficiency stats, right? Where a change that we introduce may actually affect their ability to do their job, right? So I think it's just a matter of being mindful of the things you're designing, and that's just a constraint that you work in, just trying not to create too much change all at once. So even if you have a vision where it's like a complete change, like what are the incremental steps to implementing that change where it might be a little bit more comfortable and less disruptive to their workflow? That just requires, I think, more planning, just more consideration for the user for not really wanting to change that much or not being able to because they're measured based on efficiency. So
that's great feedback. And one last thought or note to put in there, that one of our clients, we do a lot of work in their call center software, and I happen to be a customer of them as well. So whenever I call the call center, I always ask them about the product that they work with, that we work on, and they talk about that change when I ask them, and they say, yeah, things change, but they're always changing for the better. So they're always very positive about that, that we're making their experience and their ability to use their tools better. So it might be a little flustering at first, but I think they understand why things are changing. So, well, thanks everyone. It's 4:30, and I know we promised we'd end at 4:30. We might have a lot of meetings we got to get to or something like that. This has been a great webinar. I hope everyone else has enjoyed it. Again, please give us any feedback that you have, and we'd love to have you attend a future webinar. So keep an eye on our social media for other meetings. And Chris, Ryan, Abby, Alina, thank you for all of your great insight.
Thank you. Thanks
Thank
for
you, everyone.
joining us.
yeah, thanks.
Happy Thursday, everyone.
Actually.